Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will be discussing interfaces. So what I've done, I've created one application called Expense Tracker. So why I have created this application? Because in this lecture series, I will be using this application and we will be completing this application till the last lecture. So for this lecture, we will create one interface, and the agenda of this application is whenever a user will come and what user is doing, user is on a daily base purpose, user is opening this application, and he will go to application site and he will see some form, some home page, and the form will be like something related to expense details. So whenever the user will do some expense, he will open this application and put down all the expenses details and then submit the form. So for that purpose, we will be creating the interface, and we will be having some fields like expense details, whatever expense is happening, why this expense is happening, and the amount of the expense, right? So we will be creating the interface accordingly, and let's create the interface. So I have two options. I will create the interface from scratch, and we have the naming convention, we have application prefix. After that, I wanted to use this form for expense details, so I will name it as or new expense form, right? So this form will be required to submit a new expense, and the details I can put it like this: form used to add new expenses, and this will be stored inside this et rule and constant. And if you don't want that, because interface is also a rule, we can also create a new rule folder again for interfaces. So whenever we will be working on big applications or some complex applications where there will be a lot of interfaces, constants, and rules, so we will be creating individual folders for interfaces, for rules, for constants. We will not be using a single rule folder to store everything, right? So I have created this ET interfaces, and I will name this as ET interfaces. The description is all interfaces for ET, and no parent folder. So I will be creating this interface. Let's click, it's loading, and we have the empty form here. So now I want to use this form layout because there will be some fields, and let's use these columns, some more columns, and let's see what are the fields which we need to use, some inputs. So first of all, what I will do, I will use this date field. So I'll show the date in a read only format, right? And then I will use this integer. We have the date, okay, and we can put this integer field for the amount which we are spending for this that expense, and then the date is fine, and let's put the username here, the logged in username, whoever will be the submitting this form, and the description of the expense. So I can use the paragraph, right? So I have four fields. First is the date. This will also be read only, this is also read only, and this is not read only, this is an integer field, the amount of the expense, and this is paragraph field, right? And let's delete these two, this is not needed. So I'm thinking if there is any other field which we can add the amount and the description. I guess that's all for this form. And let's get into the expression mode now, because we have just dragged and dropped these things. Let's modify these things, and let's modify this date. So I will name this today's date, right? So this is label position is above it, it is fine. I'm right now I'm changing the label of all the fields. So this one is logged in user, and this is my expense amount and details. And one more field I can use, if I go inside the design, I can use a drop down to show the category of the expense. So where is my drop down? I'm having the drop down here, and I will drag and drop it in this column layout. And these details, I can put it here in this one below this expense amount. So let's modify this drop down. So what I will do, I will rename this drop down to expense category, right? Because there will be a certain category. And these are my drop down values and labels, right? These are the labels and values. So we will also understand how these configurations are happening. And first of all, let's go to the today's date, and also let's rename this form. And I will rename this to submit expense, because we will be submitting this form, the expense whichever we are writing it down. And then I will save this into the, I can create rule inputs. So what I will do, I can create rule inputs, but for this today's date, we don't want to read this particular rule input, because we are not going to store this today's date. Or we can, but right now we just wanted to see this as a read only, these two fields as a read only. So what I can do, whenever I need to put some values, I can use values parameter. I can use value, because these values I am directly hard coding, right? These are not dynamic, these are some static values, and you can see automatically the date is coming, but I want this as a read only, so I will use the read only parameter and I will pass true, right? And comma. So this is coming as a read only, and logged in user also I want the same, so I will use value, and in the value I will use logged in user function, which will give me the logged in user details, and then I will make this as a read only true. So this is my logged in user details. And then the expense, here comes the part where we need to save the details. So whenever we need to save some details, we can create rule inputs, and I will put it amount, and this is an integer. I can name this integer. Let's create. I also want to create one more rule input for details, and this is of type string, so I can use text create, and one more for drop down, which is category. That's all. We only want 3 rule inputs. So why these rule inputs I have created? Because I wanted to save the details inside the rule inputs, and the details will be saved inside. This is expense amount, it will saved inside the amount. And right now I'm saving the details. For example, if I try to write something here, then you can see the value is getting saved inside the amount, but the value is getting disappeared from here because we are not using value parameter. And value parameter is ri bank. We'll do the same thing. So you can see, to see the value here as well as to save some value inside this ri bank, we need to use value and save into parameter, right? And this save into is a array, so we can save multiple things, right? For example, this value I wanted to save this inside this rule input as well as in some other rule inputs or local variable. So I can put a comma here, and I can do the same thing. I can mention the local variable, or I can use a bank save function, right? This function is used to save the value to a specific target. We'll talk about that later on. Right now I will do the configuration for the other things also, ri bank details and value. And same thing I need to do for drop down. So right now these by default values are coming. I don't want this, so I will rename this to IT, and then home, and then, or not IT, gadgets, gadgets expense, home expense, or office expense, or we can say learning. Right, these 3 categories we are having, and I will do the same for my choice values. And now I need to save the values inside RI bank category, and also I need to do the same thing in values to show the value whenever we are selecting something. Same thing, RI bank categories, and the placeholder is also there, select a value. So let's see the form. So you can see, let's go inside the preview mode. We have the today's date, we have the logged in user, we have some expense, whatever expense I wanted to write it here. You can see it's an integer, so we are getting this limit. And we can use a text if we wanted to write some more, right? Or we don't want any kind of limit. And this is a category, this is a drop down, so this is coming like this. You can see here we are getting everything whatever we are writing, some details, right? So this is my interface, and this is, we will be using this particular interface for writing the data into the DB in upcoming lectures. And these are the buttons. Submit button, the submit is true to submit the form, and also in cancel also submit is true to submit the form. And also if we want to save some value in these buttons, whenever I click on this submit button or cancel button, I wanted to save the cancel values. So I can create a rule input, and type will be, let's say, boolean, and I can put the value, all value is already there inside cancel, and I can save inside the RI bank cancel. So whenever I will click on cancel button, it will save the value as true inside the cancel, right? So this is how we need to work with with all these parameters, with these functions, and we need to create this form, because every design object is having different configuration. So we can take help of help text also if needed, right? So this is the form which we will be using later on, and that's all for this lecture.